a countdown that would change the world. Apollo 11 took 3 astronauts where no one had ever gone before.
The Eagle has landed.
3, 2, 1.
Decades later, the same question continues popping up on the internet and at bar tables. Did man really land on the moon? A flag that seems to wave where there's no wind. Photos of the moon with a completely black sky, without a single star. Shadows that point in different directions, as if there were more than one light source. For millions of people, this isn't just a doubt. It's proof that it was all just a big hoax. But what does science have to say about this? What do the physical evidence, which is still there, almost 248,000 miles away, show us today? In this video, we're going to thoroughly investigate the biggest conspiracy theories about the moon landing. We'll take the skeptics' arguments one by one and place them side by side with the scientific evidence that can, once and for all, put an end to this story. Get ready, because the truth about humanity's greatest adventure is truly shocking. To understand where this distrust comes from, we need to go back to an era of pure tension. The 1960s, the height of the Cold War. It was an ideological, technological, and military fight between the United States and the Soviet Union. And space became the great battlefield. The Soviets got ahead first. They launched the first satellite, Sputnik, and sent the first man to space, Yuri Gagarin. America was falling behind. That's when, in 1962, President John F. Kennedy made that famous speech, promising to take a man to the moon and bring him back safely before the end of the decade. Not because it was easy, but precisely because it was hard. The Apollo mission wasn't just science. It was a show of strength, a political move to prove that the Western system was superior. The pressure to succeed was gigantic, and that's where the seed of conspiracy is born. The idea that NASA, unable to meet the deadline, faked everything just to win the space race. But the ironic thing is that this same rivalry, which fed the theory, is perhaps one of the biggest pieces of evidence against it. Let's start with the classic of classics, the image everyone knows, the American flag on the moon. The question is always the same. How is the flag waving if there's no wind on the moon? Looking at the image, it seems like a fair question. We see the astronauts planting the flag, and it moves. It even seems to be floating. The explanation, however, is basic physics. The flag was taken folded inside a tube. You know when you crumple up a piece of paper a lot and then try to smooth it out? It never gets completely flat again. That's what happened. For it to stay stretched without wind, NASA created an L-shaped support with a rod at the top. But the astronauts had difficulty stretching this rod all the way out, and this left the fabric somewhat wrinkled, creating the illusion of movement. The waving we see in the video is just the result of the force they applied to stick the pole in the ground. In a vacuum, there's no air resistance to stop the movement. So, by inertia, the flag continued swaying for a while until it stopped completely. Proof of this? Photos taken seconds apart show the flag in exactly the same position, frozen. Another argument that always comes up: why aren't there any stars in the photos of the moon? Shouldn't space be full of them? For conspiracy theorists, the answer is obvious. Whoever set up the studio scene forgot to turn on the little stars. But, again, the answer is in photography. Think about it this way. Try taking a photo of a friend at night with a very strong bonfire nearby. Either your friend comes out well in the photo and the sky is completely black, or you focus on the stars and your friend becomes a dark blob. It's very difficult to have both well lit in the same photo with the same camera settings. On the moon, the astronauts and the ground were being directly illuminated by the sun, and the lunar surface reflects a lot of light. To be able to take sharp photos of the astronauts with their bright white suits, the cameras had to be configured with a very high speed and a very small aperture. This configuration is great for capturing what's close and bright, but can't capture the faint light of distant stars. The stars were there all along, they were just overwhelmed by the brightness of the scene. It's the same reason we don't see stars during the day here on Earth. And the shadows? Ah, the shadows. Theorists say that the astronauts' shadows aren't parallel, they seem to cross, which would indicate multiple light sources, like the reflectors in a studio. This argument seems good, but forgets three important details: perspective, terrain, and light itself. First, perspective. You know when you look at a train track and it seems to meet there on the horizon. Parallel lines appear to come together at a distance. The same logic applies to shadows. Second, and more important, the moon's surface isn't a smooth studio floor. It's completely irregular terrain, full of small craters, rocks, and little hills. A shadow that hits an incline will appear shorter. One that falls into a hole will appear longer. These terrain variations distort the angle of the shadows and make it seem like they're not parallel. And finally, the moon's surface itself works like a giant reflector, spreading sunlight everywhere. This helps to softly illuminate the shadowed areas, and that's why we can see details of objects even when they're not directly in the sun. Now, let's move to an argument that seems to be the most scientific of all: the Van Allen belt. Earth has some super powerful radiation rings around it. The conspiracy says this radiation is so strong that it would have cooked the astronauts alive inside the spacecraft. How did they survive? The truth is that NASA knew very well about these belts and took this very seriously. The solution was a combination of two things: speed and good deviation. The Apollo spacecraft were made to pass through these areas very, very quickly. They didn't hang around there. Besides that, the travel route was calculated to pass through the thinnest parts of the belts, where radiation is much weaker. The spacecraft's structure itself already served as a good shield. The radiation detectors that the astronauts carried showed that the dose they received was very low, far from being dangerous. In other words, the Van Allen belt wasn't an impassable wall, but an engineering challenge that was calculated and overcome. Okay, we spent a good time dismantling the arguments of those who don't believe. But what about the evidence that man really landed on the moon? Are there proofs that cannot be falsified? Yes, and there are many of them. First, the lunar rocks. The Apollo missions brought back 842 pounds of rocks from the moon. These stones were studied by scientists from all over the world, including from rival countries. And their composition is unique. They have no water, were formed in a place without oxygen, and have impact marks from micrometeors that only happen in a vacuum. It's impossible to recreate this perfectly on Earth. Second, and perhaps the most elegant proof of all, the mirrors on the moon. Apollo missions 11, 14, and 15 left special mirror panels there, the retroreflectors. Their function is to reflect a light beam back exactly to the point of origin. Since 1969, observatories here on Earth, which have nothing to do with NASA, shoot lasers at these mirrors and measure the time it takes for light to go and come back. That's how we measure the distance from Earth to the moon with millimeter precision. The mirrors are there, working to this day, and could only have been placed there by someone. And finally, the most recent images. In 2009, a NASA probe, the LRO, began mapping the moon in very high resolution, and its photos show, without any doubt, the Apollo mission landing sites. You can see the lunar module bases, the rovers, the equipment, and even the astronauts' footprints, which remain there intact after more than 50 years. Look, the idea that it was all a big hoax is fascinating, we understand. It stirs our imagination. But when we put logic, physics, and material evidence on the table, the theory simply doesn't hold up. To fake the moon landing, it would be necessary to buy the silence of more than 400,000 people who worked on the project. It would be necessary to deceive the Soviet Union, the biggest rival, which was watching every step and would love to expose such a lie. It would be necessary to manufacture 842 pounds of rocks from another world and install mirrors on the moon without anyone seeing. The shocking truth isn't that the moon landing was a hoax. The shocking truth is that we did it. In an incredible demonstration of intelligence, courage, and teamwork, humanity left its first marks on another celestial body. As much as conspiracy theories are entertaining, the evidence is clear and confirms. Man's arrival on the moon was, and still is, one of the greatest achievements in our history. So, did you enjoy this investigation? If you learned something new, go ahead and hit that like button to strengthen the channel and help this video reach more people. Subscribe so you don't miss our next journeys through the great mysteries of science and history. And now, we want to hear from you. What other conspiracy theory do you want to see us investigating? Leave your suggestion here in the comments. We'll see you in the next adventure through the universe.